Welcome to the Education and Empowerment Podcast. In this show, our hosts explore success and advancement through education by interviewing today's top leaders in the fields of education, business, and technology in order to provide insight into what it really takes to succeed. All right, let's get into the show.
Welcome, this is Bakhtiyor Isoev. Today I'm joined by Dr. Matthew Shank, an educational leader that I personally admire. Dr. Matthew Shank is currently the 8th president of Virginia Foundation of Independent Colleges, a consortium of 15 private universities in Commonwealth of Virginia, and also currently serving as a nonprofit organization. Prior to this, Dr. Shank has been serving as the president of Marymount University. An accomplished scholar, Dr. Shank has published numerous articles, presented at many conferences, and is author of many books in sports and marketing. A Strategic Perspective, the 5th edition. Dr. Shank also consulted over 75 different organizations in areas of marketing research, strategic planning, and marketing strategy. In this podcast, Dr. Shank will share his secret sauce for student and youth empowerment outside classroom. You will learn firsthand from someone well experienced both as a scholar but also as a leader who ran some of the most successful higher education institutions in the nation's capital. Dr. Shank, you've clearly been in higher education and transformed a number of institutions, impacted so many lives of young people, and I'm sure you've succeeded well beyond classroom settings. I'm sure the audience will love hearing your stories. So welcome to the show, Dr. Shank. I'm thrilled and excited.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be one of your first guests on the podcast, if not the first. And I'm looking forward to hearing other guests as you have them. And it's just great to be affiliated with Force Day. You all do a fantastic job. So looking forward to talking to you this morning.
Fantastic. Thank you so much once again. So for starters, I'd like the audience to get to know you a little bit closer. Would you mind telling us how you got started in the field and what influenced you? And why did you decide to go into academia and higher education?
A great question. I'll give you the shorter answer to that question because that could be a 4-hour answer, and I know we don't want that. So when I went through school and got my PhD, all my degrees were in experimental psychology. And in particular, I studied visual perception. So how the brain and the eye work together to form objects. And when I got done with my PhD, to be honest, I didn't think I wanted to do any job in academia. In fact, I was dead set against becoming a professor at that point in time, not because I didn't think it was a great job to have and a great lifestyle, but I just wanted to do something a little bit different. And so with my PhD in experimental psychology, I actually ended up working for a marketing research company. So as you may or may not know, people in psychology, and especially experimental psychology, they have heavy emphasis on statistics, how to design experiments and so on, how to write surveys. And so I ended up working in this research company that did marketing studies, to be honest, having never had a class in marketing. Wow. And so we were actually partnered, the company that I work for in St. Louis, we were partnered with a university there, and I was asked to teach a class in marketing at the graduate level. Now remember, I had never even taken a class in marketing at any level. And so I was a little bit obviously intimidated and curious as to why they would want me to do this, but nevertheless, I just said, sure, I'll go ahead and tackle that for you. And so I ended up teaching this class, a graduate class in marketing strategy of all things, not even marketing research, an MBA class, and just sort of fell in love with teaching and interacting with the students. And so I didn't immediately make the transition, but soon thereafter ended up in academia working as a visiting professor first at the University of Mississippi, and then later on going to a regional university in Kentucky and spending a lot of time there and then working my way through administration. So I just caught the bug when I taught that first class and I guess haven't looked back since.
Oh my goodness, that's great. I mean, that certainly is very inspiring. And life, puts us in situations where we just have to act. And you know, I'm glad that you shared this with us. So now, looking forward, looking back, actually, do you feel like your narrative and motivations changed, in the profession? I mean, have they remained the same? I mean, if you were looking at, your 20s again, would you recommend yourself to go into higher education again?
Well, actually, absolutely. And especially, you might think right now, since the challenges are so great, it would be a question that you might ask yourself, do you really want to get into this business of higher education, given all the challenges that we have pre-COVID, now post-COVID, or during COVID, and then hopefully soon post-COVID. But at the end of the day, I think most people that go into it, hopefully go into it for the right reason, and that is to impact the lives of students and to impact even society in a larger sense by what they do through teaching, creating students that are educated citizens, creating research that's going to help solve problems of the world. So it's a very noble profession, and I think 90% of the people go into it for that reason. So yeah, I would absolutely do it all over again.
Fantastic. No, I would agree with you completely on that. I mean, my own narrative, changed over the course, but it actually made stronger, for me. I mean, I got started, when in my early, years, I got involved in international affairs and, international education. But over the course of my career, I spend more time, and my, motivation and narrative actually, really integrated in a sense that I spend more time with like youth development and different programming. Of course, I learned about, social entrepreneurship and, how can we, as a society or as a, community, as entrepreneurs can help solve some of the, social problems through, entrepreneurship approach. And that was kind of, my own story as well. That, outside classroom, I became involved in a number of different programming. So this actually, makes me wonder, and one of the things I'm exploring, today is, what kind of programming is important for outside classroom to make students successful. So with that regard, I was curious if you can help us explore a little bit more about student success outside classroom. I mean, so what does, student success outside classroom mean to you as a professional, as an educator? Can you share some light on this topic?
Yeah, it's a great question and a big question, if you will, because there's so much that goes into student success in general. And one of the things, as I was thinking more about this, that we probably need to talk about, or would be interesting to talk about with guests that you have in the future, is how would they actually define student success, period.
Right.
Because it may mean something different to different people and different students. I mean, for one student, student success might be in that individual, it might just be completing an associate's degree. For another, somebody that has a bachelor's degree, it might be completing a graduate degree, or even a certificate that's going to allow them to advance in their job. So depending on who you talk to and their perspective, student success may mean different things. I think generally at the university level, when we're talking about how do we create successful students, it's students that are retained at that university, graduate in 4 years, go on to a career that's related to their major, or graduate school or military service, some positive outcome. So it's very generally defined by people. But again, as you bring more people in and talk to more people, I'd love to hear their responses to what does student success mean to them. We had talked a little bit about two big components of success, one being the inside the classroom component. So what goes on in the classroom, and then, to be quite honest, even a bigger component in some respects, just in terms of time, is outside the classroom.
That's
and
right.
If you think about it, if an average student has a 12 or 15-hour schedule each semester, right? So they're in class 15 hours of the week. What about a residential student, what are they doing all that other time that's going to impact whether or not they're successful? So some of the things, and we can, touch on these in a little bit more detail, some of the things that would be related to that outside of the classroom piece, that's a huge piece that universities care about and work on, are student clubs and organizations. So broadly, student activities. You've got advising that goes on outside the classroom. You've got learning and support services like tutorial services that are critical. You've got student health center and student counseling, mental health counseling that goes on. Students have to be able to afford to come to the university in the first place and stay there. So obviously the whole financial aid function is critical. Fitness centers, by that I mean, where the students go, and not the athletes, but the non-athlete students go and work out and maintain their physical wellness. You've got libraries, you've got opportunities for volunteerism, you've got the whole technical infrastructure of the university that could support inside and outside the classroom. And of course, for you all at Forest Day in particular, the job one is to make sure the students have a great residential experience, whether that's on campus or off campus. So there's probably many other things, but those are just some of the major aspects.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for sharing more on this. And I guess a lot of what people are interested in, and hopefully in the next episodes we're going to discover is there's so much out there about what should be the programming to make in classroom success, but I believe there is not much on what makes students successful outside of classroom. So I'm really excited about connecting with other experts like yourself to explore this, and I'll certainly circle around with you as well. I know that in your years with Marymount University, there has been a lot of good feedback on your leadership and the programming outside classroom. Your campus has grown, and the new residence that was built. Could you refer that to student success outside in classroom, and can you tell us a little bit more about that experience and where the institution was, and what kind of implementations you've made to bring the campus up in that sense?
Right. Well, I guess two things. We'll start with what you said with respect to buildings and residence life and so on and so forth. We were fortunate to have a piece of property off of our main campus in the Ballston Business District that we redeveloped during my time there. And that's a very expensive piece of property, as everything is in Arlington. And we had an old building that was built, many, many years ago. Actually was built not for Marymount, but it was a CIA training building that Marymount then purchased. And so that building was still up and running, but essentially not really functional in terms of the building itself, the image that we wanted for Marymount. So we decided and made a very hard decision. Although we knew we wanted to do something with that building, it was beyond renovation. So we tore it down, built a new academic building, as well as an apartment, 15-story apartment. So we're not talking about an insignificant amount of housing here. And initially, that apartment building was not owned by Marymount. We owned the ground, so we never did sell off the land. But then subsequently, Marymount ended up purchasing that building and is now using that building as another, I wouldn't even call it a dormitory, that would be a misstatement. It's a luxury apartment for juniors, seniors, graduate students, in addition to the housing that we have on the main campus. And you might say, well, why? Why would you spend $75 million to build your academic building? And I think the residential building was roughly $80 million to build. So that's a lot of money. But that's how important the physical experience is to the students. And and their ability to succeed, stay in school, thrive, want to come to Marymount in the first place. So you're making that investment because you honestly believe it's going to return that investment by more students coming, more students staying, students being satisfied, students telling others about their experience. So in that respect, we really did a lot to, improve our whole image by building that new academic building and new residence. At the same time, on the main campus, we did a lot of renovation as well. So the moral to all this story is the physical facilities do matter. It's not the same as the curriculum, but if you have facilities that aren't up to date, aren't modern, that the students don't feel comfortable in, they're not going to come and they're not going to stay. So good investment, I think. That's
amazing. Well, congratulations. I mean, I've personally heard a lot of good stories, about that, investment. And I certainly believe that, as an educational leader, you've done your best. I mean, you've done great things for the institution. And expanding on that, I mean, could you shed some light maybe on like, what were some of the most exciting parts of, empowering students, for success, outside classroom at Marymount University, aside from, that investment that you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, another thing that I'm very proud of, because it has impacted a lot of students, is our growth in athletics. Amazing. And Marymount participates at a Division III level. So if you're not familiar, that means no scholarships can be provided for athletics. Those students can get academic scholarships like any other student, but there's no awarding of athletic scholarships. So over the course of my time, we grew from 12 NCAA programs, teams, if you will, to 17. And the new president, Dr. Becerra, has carried that on, and she's adding some additional sports like softball was just recently added. So during my time, we added baseball, men's volleyball. We were the first to have triathlon teams in the country. We added women's golf. So it was, again, an investment in those students in the university, but an investment that pays off not only financially, but more importantly for those students that are participating, because they get to experience college athletics. They have a better story to tell once they graduate. They learn a lot more because of that experience. So it's just good for everybody. So I was especially happy that we were able to get the ball rolling and really grow the athletics program. So that impacts the athletes, but again, for the non-athletes, number of student organizations that had grown during my time, just trying to do whatever we can to make the student experience better.
Fantastic. I mean, have you encountered any, challenges along the ways? I mean, that, worth sharing, and, how you overcome those, or how did you solve them? Any key lessons learned from that?
It's a great question. You would think that these are student-run organizations and student-centered activities, but at a university, as you well know, you have to get buy-in from not just those that you're serving, but every constituent group. So you have to get buy-in from the board. You have to get buy-in from the faculty, get buy-in from other staff. You've got to make sure that you've got the budget to support everything. So it's even the simplest of things that you might think, oh, it's not that big of a deal to, add a baseball team, for example.
Right.
Think about the implications of that. Marymount doesn't have a field, number one. So you've got to partner with either the county or somebody else to get field space. You don't have locker rooms to support that team. So where are they going to, change and dress? It takes more athletic trainers once you add a team. The budget has to be increased for travel for that team to go play their games, away games. So right. You start to unpeel all this, even a decision that seems pretty simple. Of course, we'll have baseball. We're going to get 30 young men that probably wouldn't come to Marymount otherwise, or more. It's a no-brainer, but there's a lot that goes into even that decision and making that decision. So every decision is a bit of a challenge, because it's not a dictatorship or a corporation where you're the CEO and you can just tell people this is what we're going to do and make it happen. You've got to really engage everybody in the process.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, this is certainly so true. I mean, higher education institutions is not the same as, like, regular companies. They have their own dynamics. There's so much that goes into that, and a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities that could be unlocked along the way. So for our listeners out there, what would you say is the biggest area of opportunity, considering all the situation with the pandemic, and in your opinion, what kind of effect is required there? I mean, what kind of opportunities that professionals can get into? Like, what do you see being the biggest area of growth right now that you encounter, then you recommend to people out there?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think if I understand your question, one opportunities that universities are going to continue to have is to grow their online infrastructure. We've learned that, and we're sort of forced into that because of COVID, right? People sort of dabbled in that, and some universities did more than others. But then we flipped the switch and everybody went online. And I would say did it relatively successfully from a technology standpoint. The faculty are learning more and more and more about how to teach more effectively online as we go. Right. But in terms of the technology, I think people adjusted and adapted very quickly. So as you look to the future, one whole area that's sort of ripe is, the better use of technology. Maybe not the technology itself, although I'm sure that'll improve over time.
Correct.
But, how do we better use technology inside and outside the classroom to engage students? So, the counter to that is we also learn that students very much miss the campus experience, and they want to be together with their fellow students, whether it's in the classroom and learning face-to-face, or obviously, as we talked about before, all the other activities that go on outside of the classroom that make for a great college experience. I mean, let's face it, some of the students want to be there as much for the off-campus experience as they want to be there for the classroom experience, which is fine. It's all part of the total package, if you will. So while some people might say, oh, we're never going back, there's absolutely, in my mind anyway, even stronger support for we have to go back, and we have to be residential, and that's really the value to the students. So while one group might be tackling sort of the online, there's probably another opportunity for another group to say, how do we create even a better residential experience for students?
True.
So, Forestay and organizations like Forestay that deal with housing and residential life, my belief is that they're going to play even a bigger role in the future.
And how do you see that? I mean, if you were to look into 10 years ago compared to higher education state now, do you see higher education leaders outsourcing the services more to be able to focus on other things, or do they, like, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, another great question. I think, using my own experience, when I got to Marymount, we decided, I'll call it a strategic decision, to outsource our entire marketing and communications area. So the PR, the marketing, the internal communications, we outsourced that. We had shuttle buses that were running from the main campus to our offsite locations. We ended up outsourcing that. We outsourced what we call the copy center, where sort of the internal Kinkos, if you will. We outsourced that. So all these moves were made because we felt we could do things a little bit more effectively and efficiently for the university. So housing is an interesting one, because a lot of people have the belief that you have to have people on the inside dealing with housing. Right. My personal belief is that could be a great area where there's a hybrid approach, right? Maybe you do have a couple people on the inside that really understand the students in the university a little bit better because they're employees of the university. Right. But the vast majority of the employees are outsourced to organizations like Forestay that have specific expertise and can save the university money. And, you know, for the presidents, the bottom line is, how do I do things better and more cost effective? So I think you're going to see more and more outsourcing of services in the future. And so I would bet big money that that's going to continue to happen.
Fantastic, fantastic. And I mean, this is certainly, I mean, a great lesson, you know, what you mentioned, and a lot of good suggestions, you know, out there. So what suggestions would you give to professionals in the field? I mean, you know, is there any piece of advice you have for, you know, professionals in the field who want to pursue like similar career to yours and want to engage in similar things that you do?
This is very, very broad and general advice, but I'll go back to where I started and what we started the conversation with.
Right.
I took a chance to teach this MBA class in marketing when I had never even had a marketing class before. I ended up, as you mentioned, you were so kind in the introduction to point out that I had written several books. One of them is in sports marketing, right? How do you market teams, individual athletes? How do you get more fans attending? How do you create better sponsorships? Those sorts of topics go into sports marketing. So at the time, when I wrote that book in seems like ancient history now, 1999, I think is when the first one came out. So I maybe started that in 1997. Mm-hmm. At the time, there was only one other book on the market. Oh, wow. And so as I was teaching the class, I couldn't find a book to use. And so one of the textbook publishers, a big publisher, said, well, why don't you just write one? So to be honest, I had no business writing a book in sports marketing. I had not worked in that field directly. You know, I like sports. I played baseball in college, so I love sports, but that doesn't qualify you to, you know, write a book in what you love. But I went ahead, my point is I went ahead and did that anyway. And then the book is still, you know, being published today, some whatever it is, 20 years later. So my advice would be just take those chances and opportunities when they arise, even if you don't think that you're ready for them or think you have the, you know, the right tools, or you're not confident in your ability to do that. I mean, I wouldn't say mine was confidence. I would say it was more ignorance. I was like, okay, well, I'll do that. Or teach the class in marketing. Okay, well, I'll do that. I was too stupid to say no. You know, I have no business doing that. So I think every step of the way, if you just seize those opportunities, I mean, you could say the same for being a president, right?
True.
Of the university. When you do that for the first time, you have no idea what you're getting into, even if you've had great mentors along the way, and you can't really learn until you do it. So, you know, my advice for anybody is just keep looking for those opportunities and pursue them.
Perfect. No, man, this is certainly inspirational. I mean, you just reminded me of, you know, me being much younger than I am now, and, you know, doing similar things. And I see, you know, young people now are involved in so many things, doing so many internships, and involved in so many different activities. In summary, I mean, I really find it, you know, very inspirational. And, you know, at the end, is there any, you know, quote that you'd like to share with our audience on maybe student success or empowerment, or any piece of, you know, wisdom for young people out there?
Yeah, I am. I'm not very good with quoting other people. I'm not very good at telling jokes. So I don't have any handy that I typically would say, oh, I'll fall back on this particular quote. But I would just tell the students, you know, that if, in my experience, that sounds like a trite statement because you hear it all the time. But if you just keep pursuing, you know, your personal goals and dreams, then the opportunities will come. So
that's great.
You know, it's easy to say, harder to do when you when you're met with failure, you know, when you meet the challenges and you just say, hey, I've had enough of this, I'm done. But if you just sort of regroup and, you know, continue to forge ahead, good things will hopefully happen.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, thank you so much. This is, certainly very inspirational. I mean, I certainly found it, very eye-opening for many things. And, I'd like to say, thank you on behalf of, Forstay team. And, thanks for joining the podcast today and sharing your insights about, empowering young people. I mean, your stories and the journey is certainly very motivational. And I hope that our listeners out there will, find the use on your suggestions and advice. For people out there, make sure you subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and other channels. Once again, I'd like to thank Forstay for sponsoring this podcast. If you're curious about, what Forstay does, check it out at forstay.com. And, once again, Dr. Shank, thank you so much, and I'll see you around.
Thank you very much. Best of luck with the future podcast. Can't wait to hear from your other guests about some of these areas that we talked about, and stay tuned. So thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shank.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Education and Empowerment Podcast. This show is brought to you by Forstay, a SaaS-enabled online booking marketplace for student and intern housing. Learn more at www.forstay.com.